So, if we're going to understand chemistry, we need to understand the very basic of what chemistry is all about, and that is matter. We need to understand what is matter. I can describe what elements are and give examples of them. Okay, so here is a basic structure, um, a basic understanding of what matter is all about. Matter is made up of two different things: pure substances and mixture. Think of pure substances as things that are always made up of the same thing, no matter how far you go down, no matter how deeply you look into it, it's always made up of the same thing. Pure substances can be made up of elements and compounds. I like to teach with analogies. So if you think of an element as a person, and that person has its own unique DNA, okay? So there are 118 elements. Well, imagine there were 118 people. So those people can combine in unique ways to form what we call marriages. So think of a compound as a the offspring of a marriage. So you can have two elements that come together, and what they produce is a compound. A compound itself will be unique, made up of the same thing, no matter how far you go. Now, a mixture, I like to think of a mixture as a marriage. You get two different elements together, and they come together, and they live together, and they're married together, but they've not become something new. A marriage does not cause the people in the marriage to become new things. The things that annoyed you about your fiance before you got married is still going to annoy you after you get married. People don't change. So think of mixtures as marriages, pure substances as individuals. All right, let's unpack this a little bit more. All right, let's get to our notes. What are pure substances? Pure substance is made up of the same kind of matter. No matter where you take the sample from, every part is exactly the same. So if you have a block of lead, you can take a sample from one corner, it's going to be made up of lead. You can take it from right in the middle, it's going to be made up of lead. You can take it from the other corner, it's going to be made up of lead. It doesn't matter where you sample it from, it's made up of lead. What are mixtures? Mixtures is a blending of two or more pure substances. If you take samples from different parts of a mixture, you might find that they're different. You have some salt water and you take a small sample from one part of the salt water, you might find it's just water. And you take another sample and you might find, oh, it's salt. Salt water is made up of two or more things that are together. Think of it as a marriage. What are the two kinds of pure substances? Elements and compounds. Okay, so water is the most important chemical to us. We're made up of mostly water. The earth is mostly water. It's about 70% water. We are about 60% water. So water is very important to us. So let's focus on water. Water is made up of two different types of pure substances, hydrogen and oxygen. Two different atoms, hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen are elements. You cannot further break down anything until you get to the elements. Once you get to elements, you can't break it down any further. That's as far as it'll go. It is the building block of everything. Imagine if you're a big Lego fan, This would be the 1 by 1 block. You can build anything you want if you had enough 1 by 1 blocks. Think of an element as the simplest type of Lego, the simplest type of substance. It is an element. What are elements? These are pure substances made up of only one type of atom. Green atoms, purple atoms, doesn't matter. Only made up of one type of atom. What are some examples? Well, you have a periodic table. Examples, you have 118 to choose from there. Now, the periodic table that you have will not have all 118 elements because some of those elements have only been found in the last 20 years, and that periodic table that I have been using is actually older than 20 years. But if you look at element number 8, that's oxygen. Hydrogen is element number 1, and the number I'm getting is the number that's on top. Sodium is number 11. Chlorine is number 17. Iron is number 26, I think, 26. And sulfur is, well, I don't remember what sulfur is. Where can you easily find all the elements? On your best friend. And from now on, Mrs. Marino will have the periodic table, and she will make sure that you all have a periodic table, and you will need to use this periodic table at all times. So what are compounds? When two or more pure substances come together and they combine in such a way, they create compounds. Think of your family, your mother, who is, you can think of her as an element, and your father, you can think of him as another element. And when they come together, they created you. And you may have some characteristics of your mom and some characteristics of your dad, but you are completely different from them. You have completely different DNA. You are a compound. Now, the key thing about compounds is that it's always made up of the same elements, but always found in the same whole number ratio. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me unpack that some more. What are examples of compounds? Sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is made up of 1 sodium, 1 chlorine. Always. Well, what about if it's NaCl2? Well, then it's not sodium chloride anymore. It's not table salt. In order for it to be table salt, it needs to be made up of 1 Na, 1 Cl. CaCl2 is used to salt roads. It helps during the wintertime to prevent ice from forming on the roads. Notice it's 1 calcium and 2 chlorines. You notice me putting a 1 down there. Whenever you don't see a number in a chemical formula, the number that is assumed is 1. Okay, since you have an Na there, you have to at least have 1 Na. So if you don't have any number there, then you have 1 Na. Notice the little 2. The little 2 refers to how many chlorines are bonded to the 1 calcium. So 1 calcium, 2 chlorines, you have de-icing salt. Here's something that's very important to you. Sugar. It's in many of our foods. It is made up of 12 carbons, 22 hydrogens, and 11 oxygens. And you're probably sitting there going, how does he know that C is carbon? Well, I've memorized this. And you will need to memorize some of these as well. Calcium carbonate. This is limestone. It's think of it as concrete. It's also in Tums or Rolaids. So calcium carbonate is made up of 1 calcium, 1 carbon, and 3 oxygens. And this is called iron 3 hydroxide. And I know you're freaking out about this whole name thing. You don't need to. Eventually we will deal with it, but we will take it one step at a time. Iron hydroxide is made up of 1 iron, 3 oxygens, and 3 hydrogens. I don't know whether you've covered the distributive property in math, but that's what we're doing. We're distributing that 3 throughout whatever is inside the parentheses. So, determine whether each is an element or a compound. Look at letter A. Notice you're made up of only one type of atom, this bluish, dark blue atom. So this would be an element. Letter B. What do you think? Well, I see this blue and you have these reds attached to them, and it's always one blue, two reds. That would be a compound. How about these? I see little red dots, and the red dots are the same color and are completely identical. I would call that an element. What about this? You've got some green dots and you've got some blue dots, and it's always one blue to one green. That would be what? A compound. A compound. So, in review, if you only have one type of atom, we call those elements. When those atoms come together to form new things that are always predictable, we call those compounds. Compounds. About how many elements are found in nature? About 90. About how many compounds are there? Well, with just some basic Legos, how many different Lego structures can you make? Yeah, well, if you got 90 basic Lego pieces, how many different structures can you make? Well, millions. There are over 8 million compounds. What holds atoms in a compound together? They're called chemical bonds. Think of them as the glue that holds atoms together. So a compound is held together by chemical bonds. So what do we call the smallest unit of a type of compound? You may have already seen this word in a previous slide. It is a molecule. A molecule. All right, we'll stop right there and we'll pick up in our next lesson.